Welcome to the Social Priority Podcast. I'm Star Panda, and today we've got the very light topic of trans genocide. And here with me to talk about it is a returning guest. Goddammit, Malcolm. How have you been?
I've been all right. I've been a little tired, but that's all right.
Anything new with you? I know you got that new schedule going on.
That's pretty much it. I was working swings and now I'm working in the mornings, so trying to adjust to that when I just now got used to working in the evenings, but gotta do what you gotta do, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. So let's go ahead and go right into the topic. I don't know if you've seen it, but a debate recently has been circulating again. I'm pretty sure it was posted a few months ago, but a debate between Lonerbox and Poly People had started popping up recently about the concept of a genocide happening here in the United States against trans people. Poly People being in the affirmative and Lonerbox being in the negative. This sparked a lot of conversation around the subject. A lot of it being a little more educational, of comparing what's happening today versus what was happening back in the 30s. So I brought you here today basically have you been hearing about any of this, or what's your first reaction to hearing about this?
So I saw the conversation. I didn't watch all of it. I saw some of the conversation with Poly People and Lonerbox. I'm not the biggest fan of Poly People, to be completely transparent.
Mm-hmm.
But I have been kind of privy to the conversation for the last, God, it's been a few months now. It feels like you said, where the conversation has been using the language specifically towards the big wave of anti-trans legislation as being described as genocidal. The one that I was most keen on watching was the one with President Sunday and Sonsol, because I love listening to cis people talk about trans stuff. It's my favorite form of emotional self-harm. But in general, I think that I've used the term genocidal in the past to kind of describe this. I lean a little bit more towards the side of cultural genocide, just because, as shitty as it is, I think it's a little bit more rhetorically effective and a little bit more accurate, especially when you have people who are under the pretense that they're doing this out of concern. Obviously, they're not like, oh my God, we're not trying to murder all trans people. We're just concerned about the children. And obviously that's problematic in and of itself. But I use a little bit more couched language when I'm talking about it, but I definitely agree that there are similarities in the way that this is kind of playing out with, targeting groups of people, whether it's proposed legislation or past legislation that can be comparable to, 1930s Germany. But I couch it a little bit with cultural genocide, where we're at right now. A lot of the things that are really scary, in my opinion, are being proposed. They haven't really been passed yet. And I'll definitely adjust my language if and when that happens.
I'm definitely leaning towards a little further away from cultural genocide, because I just think it's, at the very least, it's bordering on the actual context of genocide, mainly because they are pushing people back into the closet, preventing people from getting the care that they need, and basically especially in Florida,
yes, Florida for sure.
Yeah, they're literally trying to detransition people, trying to put those kinds of laws into effect, and some states are following suit after that too. It's an interesting conversation to me, because we talk about the language, and we talk about how accuracy with language and all that, and I just think it's coming to a point where like it's becoming too similar to like leading up
Mhm.
to World War II, you know? Like they're banning books and it's like
Mhm.
specific books to um like specific to LGBT stuff basically. So
For sure.
uh what I guess would you say about the comparison to like the burning of the Institute of Sexology in Germany?
I think that I definitely see similarities. World War II is definitely one of my like weird niche interests.
Mm.
So I that's kind of like my history nerd flex, and there are definitely similarities. And I think that in the context of what's happening now, it's definitely ramping up to that. I could definitely see that becoming like, something that is probable or is going to happen. I just don't know if we're like at that stage quite yet. So when I'm thinking about this, like with the burning of the Hirschfeld Institute, I'm thinking of like active destruction of this kind of stuff, not necessarily passing legislation towards it. While I
Yeah.
agree that that's bad, I wouldn't say it's the same caliber, right? Like obviously we don't want this educational material being banned. Um, Loss of access to healthcare, like social ostracization. I know in the United Kingdom, they've been floating the idea of like identity badges for people who are trans, so you can't live closeted anyway. I think for me, my line is when that starts to come to fruition. And I see in certain states, like you brought up Florida, I think that Tennessee is the other state. And I think Arkansas is the other, where we're starting to see that ramp up significantly. I think for me, the thing that would really start to be uh, like obviously there are red flags, and I think that we're trending in that direction. I think the big things that I would see that would be really concerning. And I know that some states have proposed the idea of banning adult transition or delaying it until 25, so there's no gender related care for anybody under the age of 25. And then the other thing would be like open and uh, legislatively backed discrimination against trans people, where it was like, oh, these institutions don't have to hire trans people. These institutions don't have to serve trans people, like healthcare, housing, any of these things. Those would be things where I would be a little bit more aggressive with my language. But I definitely do see that it is trending in that direction, and that's definitely unsavory and unsettling for sure.
I agree with you in that way. Like, it is not quite there yet, but it is like it worries me, you know, because like
Yes, definitely.
it's just they're like getting to that point to where like they're like carrying guns to these places where
Yep.
LGBT people are, that like where they gather and stuff because it's supposed to be a safe space. But like they're becoming less safe because these people think it's okay to like bring their guns and intimidate people into like not being out anymore. And
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a combination of legislation as well as like public perception of
Definitely.
like how much they need to do to like um, I guess keep people in the closet. Like they're trending towards like doing it by force, and that is more concerning to me at that point.
Yeah. I agree with that for sure. I think that a lot of people, and this is just something that I've noticed, the term genocide is usually something that people want to handle with like extra like sensitive gloves,
Yeah.
right? So when people are comparing things to slavery or the Holocaust, I think that even if the brevity is similar, people's gut reaction is like, well, that's kind of its own thing. So I always try to be really careful with my language, but I agree with you. If left kind of to its own devices, I think eventually that is where we're going to end up, just based on the way that public perception, like you said, kind of talking about people being comfortable displaying like these open acts of force and violence towards people just because they're LGBT, um, and also the trending in legislation against banning transition related care. Something that I think that I trend a little bit more. I don't want to say conservative. That's not really the right word, but a little bit more. I guess loose on would be the idea of them targeting medical transition for minors, like surgical transition specifically. I think that that is it's obviously not good. We want trans kids to be able to access healthcare. We know that puberty blockers are effective and things like that. I think when we start talking about like full gender reassignment surgery, that's gonna that's something where I could see people coming at it from an actual place of concern, even if it's not, evidence based or anything like that. That's where they're coming from, and I see that and I recognize that, and I think that's a different kind of, um, I guess, thing that's happening right now. It seems like a lot of these proponents aren't really about the concerning of children transitioning. It's more about stopping the spreading of like transgender ideology and transing the children, which I think is the problematic aspect. I think that you can have conversations about like, well, when are puberty blockers acceptable, or like when is surgery acceptable? What are the kinds of things that we should be doing about this? But I think a lot of it is in that vitriolic. We don't want trans people influencing children to do this, and I think that's the scary part. If that makes sense. I feel like that was kind
Yeah.
of long-winded.
Yeah, that does make sense. I don't know. It's to a certain extent, it's hard not to like compare it to
I agree.
the
I agree because there are
30s.
similarities.
Yeah,
I totally agree with you. It's a really hard conversation to have.
it
And I think that's
is.
kind of where we're getting stuck a little bit in the discourse, because I agree, we're if left alone to its own devices, I think that's where we will end up. But like I said, I feel like the Holocaust and slavery are those two really touchy subjects where people aren't really keen on comparing things to that, even if they are comparable in some ways. So I understand that other people don't feel the way that I do. Obviously, everybody kind of has a different way of approaching this. I try to be pretty careful with the way that I talk about it, because I am really invested in kind of mediating conversations and bringing people over a little bit. That's something that I prioritize. I understand not everybody prioritizes that, so
Yeah.
I try to be really careful with the like. Obviously, I think that it is genocidal in some aspects, but I try to be really careful with the G word, because people hear that word and their brains kind of turn off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that completely makes sense. I guess, how do we like convey the message that like these things are really important and they're like affecting us in a really bad way?
I think that we can talk about the outcome of these things and kind of the trends that we've seen historically without drawing like one-to-one parallels. And I
Hmm.
think it's hard for us to do that, because it's easy to point to something that's happened in the past and say like, look, it's kind of like this, and especially something that carries a significant weight. It kind of relays the message, right? But it is, I don't want to say a buzzword because that kind of takes away from the importance of it, but I feel like that's how people treat it. So I think that we can talk about like, hey, like these are the negative outcomes of what's happening, right? We can look at like essentially like a mass pilgrimage of trans people and queer people from conservative areas, even for conservative trans people who find themselves stuck in these areas where they are conservative in whatever value, and they're no longer able to access healthcare. In Florida, I know that you can no longer access medical transition with Medicaid. So you have people who are conservative in value for whatever reason that are now feeling the effects of these, and so we can look at kind of the behavior that's coming from it and saying like, listen, we have people that are having like a mass exodus. We have a lot of people who are being displaced. We have a lot of people who are being denied medical care, not transition related medical care, but medical care in general, because they're trans, and they're going to code it in this way because this person is trans. We can look at the outcomes of uh, what am I trying to say? Like denying affirmation for minors, that this increases suicidality, or even in trans adults, right? We say that you're kind of an adult, you can make these decisions for yourself. If you want to get like triple Z boobs, like whatever, you're an adult, we respect that autonomy. I think there's ways to talk about the gravity of this by focusing on the outcome of these policies. There are certain people, obviously, that are never going to give a fuck, because the outcome that they want is less trans people, and goddamn, they'll get it however they want it, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think that if we're outcome oriented, we can still talk about the effects of this in a pragmatic way, without, I hate to use the term, but like triggering people's sensibilities, which I think it does, unfortunately. Obviously, I think that sometimes that word is accurate, but I try to be careful with that word. It's almost like when you call somebody racist, they don't care what you have to say anymore. Even if that's an accurate label, their brain just kind of like powers off. And that's something that I prioritize, right?
Yeah, like it's difficult because like a lot of us are trying to educate on like trans issues and stuff like that to people who are predisposed to I guess cringe at the fact that trans people exist.
Yeah.
Um and that makes our jobs a lot more difficult, honestly.
Mhm.
Um but yeah, I like people like Matt Walsh and Tucker Carlson are making those things a lot worse in that way, and I don't know what to do with it. you know I guess like with the election just happening, it seems like that messaging isn't doing as well as they would have hoped, which is kind of a little bit of hopium there for us to grab onto.
Definitely.
So, but I guess like what would you tell people in those like areas like Florida and Arkansas and stuff like that? Like, what would you tell them to do? Either like I guess where to go or like if they want to get more involved with their like state legislatures and stuff like that.
Well, I think it's hard because if you're kind of like at the mercy of whoever is elected, right?
Mm.
And that's a really unsatisfactory answer for a lot of people where it's like, hey, like next election cycle, just make sure to vote. That doesn't really do anything for them right now when they don't have access to healthcare or, they're being discriminated against or whatever the case may be. I think that something like on a macro level that is really important. And I think a lot of us kind of lost this with COVID, and even before it was kind of trending in this way, that we don't really have roots in our communities anymore, right? Like we don't really know like people in our area. For example, I'm trying to think of places that would the example that I'm thinking of is like church because I grew up Catholic. And so like we had a really strong community with everybody that we went to church with, right? Like we would all hang out, we talk to each other, we'd bullshit or whatever. And then everybody in that community kind of mobilizes around local elections in order to have their values represented. And I think that it was kind of trending away from that, as everything becomes more online. And especially a lot of queer people find community online because in real life it can be dangerous. Also, as we've seen with people bringing guns and shit to drag brunches or community events,
Yeah.
that can definitely make it hard as well. But I think that having that local community and being involved locally in things like local elections that will reflect your values, I think is really important on a macro level. On a micro level, I understand the idea of prioritizing yourself. So, like if you have to leave the state in order to get care, if you need to move somewhere else, those kinds of things I think are acceptable. I think there's a really there's kind of like this double-sided coin where half of the people are like, fuck everybody who lives in the South, like who cares? But there are a lot of queer people who live in the South that are being affected by this. Obviously, we should be like mobilizing or trying to encourage something to help them vote in ways that reflect their values and maybe see progressive change. And then the other is just get out and leave and abandon that community. And I think that we leave a lot of people behind. I think it's a little, it's a difficult answer because it depends on the individual, right? If you're able to do these things. And then also on the community level where we don't really have those communities in real life as much anymore with COVID and the internet. I think that those two things together, like prioritizing yourself and then also finding that community locally would be things that would probably produce the best outcomes for trans people in areas that are like shitty, like Florida or whatever.
Yeah. So there was a referendum in a few places. One specifically that I know about is in Michigan. There was a referendum for abortion, like putting it into the state constitution, and I'm wondering if it would be viable to like try to get some referendums on these things into like um
Oh yeah, for sure.
in
That'd
those
be
states,
excellent.
you know?
Mhm.
Do you think that's like a viable thing to do, or like would that just drive us into like more, you know, uh
Well, I think the thing that's hard about it is that, excuse me, a lot of trans healthcare is evidence based, right? And the people who are kind of wedded to the idea of weeding out trans existence, quote unquote, they don't care about that, right? Like you could show them a study that says, trans people are 100% valid and their outcomes improve 100% when they medically transition and no one regrets it ever. That's kind of irrelevant to them because they dislike the idea of trans people as a whole. But I think that if we can focus on like evidence-based practice and say, look, these are the outcomes that are improved, blah, blah, blah. I think that it would be possible in areas where there is somewhat of a progressive leadership to do a referendum or in some places to like codify this kind of like healthcare initiatives. I think that that's definitely possible. I think it just depends on the area that you're in. I feel like
yeah.
in Florida, you're honestly kind of fucked, which is horrible to say, but right. But I think that in certain places, that's definitely possible. So if there is, a turnabout like Georgia is the one that I'm thinking about most recently, there's still something to fall back on, so you're not totally out of luck, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I think one other solution we could probably try is letting climate change take its course, and Florida can just sink into the sea, and then we'll be fine there. Um,
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that, right?
but
There's
yeah,
no more Florida. That sucks.
yeah, no more Florida, man. But yeah, it's a difficult subject, like you said. Like I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. like,
Yeah, there's
um,
so many moving parts. It's hard to say, and it's going to depend on people's ability to stay in these areas and lobby. And not everybody wants to, and I don't blame anybody for not wanting to be there and stay and like fight when they lose access to healthcare that they need. I
hmm.
obviously understand and have empathy for people that just take off.
I
So
definitely do think you had a good point with like going back to communities. Like, I know we have in my state a little bit, not a little bit, but like a lot of organizations, I guess, that help with like trans kids and LGBT youth. That it helps people communicate with other people in the same situations and stuff like that.
mhm.
Um, like outreach stuff like that. Like you can volunteer there. You can, I guess, like meet up with other people who are also LGBT and stuff like that. And like I think we need to find more of those kinds of places to like talk to other people about this stuff, like maybe even like unions and stuff like that, where
Mhm.
we talk to I guess normies who might not know as much about this than like other people. Um but like I I think it is important. Like I'm pretty sure I've said this in the past on the show that like we need to like get out there and like talk to people. Obviously being as safe as you can with yourself, but like if we don't talk about it, then it's just going to go by the wayside, and all the misinformation is going to start overflowing to those people that we could have gotten, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think that community is going to be one of those really big things. Obviously, I understand that that's not pragmatic in a lot of places. Like I said, in some areas, it probably just isn't safe um, to be like out and trans, um, which is really shitty. But I think that the idea of community is going to be something that's really powerful for us in order to kind of affect the change that we want to see. Um, and I think that we lost a lot of that. With the internet and then also COVID, right? Because you can't really go anywhere. And I know that trans people specifically, like we find a lot of our communities online, and I think there's a reason for that, right? Like there's usually in more rural areas, there's only so many of us, there's only so many safe places that we can go, et cetera, right? There's a lot of obstacles in that way, but that like even like a GSA or even like like you said, a union, or if you are religious, like kind of reaching out to people in your denomination or your parish or whatever, just having those conversations. And it sounds really stupid, but being like that one person for a bunch of normies can be really powerful for them and can sway their opinion, right?
Yeah.
Like I spend a lot of time in conservative areas, and I know that a lot of people that I know or acquaintances with, or at one point were friends with, are really conservative. And I'm because I am friends with them, or because I'm close with them, or I share a community with them, they're a little bit more keen to move over to be like more friendly towards trans people because they know me. That like that interpersonal connection can be really powerful to move people. And I think that we're kind of scared of that sometimes because we don't want to be like a token or whatever. We don't want to be like the bad trans person, but those interpersonal connections are, I think, really useful as well.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. Do you have any kind of like hope for our country after the election happened?
I mean, yeah, I think it's the issue is that I think a lot of people want progressive representation, and I think that a lot of people are really keen on I don't want to say like leftist policy, but like left leaning policy. But the issue is that Democrats aren't effective at arguing culture war points, and they never have been. You know,
Hmm.
we just kind of sit idly with any kind of conversation about that. As far as I can think back, I'm thinking back on like the Iraq War. I'm thinking abortion. I'm thinking gay marriage. I'm thinking trans issues. I'm thinking global warming. Democrats just aren't effective at rallying single issue voters. And I think that Democrats prioritize a little bit too much on like being neutral when it's fine to be aggressively opposite, right? Like I feel like a lot of Democrats just run on the idea that they're not conservatives, that's why they should get the vote. But they don't have anything where they're saying, okay, like, yeah, we're not conservatives. We don't want to ban trans healthcare for minors. What we want to do is we want to lobby to make sure that this is like a protected medical choice, and then independent providers can make their choice. Or, we don't want to lobby, like the Republicans want to lobby to ban trans athletes. We don't want to do that. We want to let institutions set their own rules around trans athletes, like literally anything. But Democrats don't say anything to kind of win over the culture war, right? Because I think that there are conservative people in this country that are pretty moderate in their stance, but when they aren't given an opposition to any of the wild shit they're fed from Fox News, it's really hard for them to come over to the other side. Because I think that if you had somebody on the left who was willing to present, like, I understand that like everybody's really scared about, trans minors getting surgery. It's like, well, here's some information. Very few trans minors get surgery. It's like, I think it's like 3 every year, maybe. But we understand that this is something that you're concerned about. Maybe we shouldn't be worried about this. Maybe we should be worried about talking about, regulations around gender, like genital surgery. Maybe that's something that we can agree on, that maybe nobody under the age of 18 should be getting bottom surgery. Maybe we can compromise there. Or maybe we can talk about the outcomes of transgender related medicine. And, they're lying on Fox News about this being a social contagion. Here's some data on that, but they just fence it. They don't say anything back. But I think if anything, the existence of more, I'm not saying moderate, but more trans people that are willing to sit and listen to the concerns and then be able to rebut with accurate information is effective at moving people more so than the Democratic Party is. I think that if like the Democrats in this country had a spine, it would turn around a lot faster. But I think that people want progressive leadership. I think that people get married to a specific culture war kind of talking point, and then it's hard for them to move off because nobody's willing to have that conversation on the left, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Like, they haven't even tried to talk about the trans issue. Like, I remember Hillary Clinton literally said that we shouldn't focus on that. And they're like,
yes, exactly.
Yeah, like, it's an issue that we shouldn't be talking about. Or even with, like, abortion a while back, Nancy Pelosi had said we shouldn't be talking about abortion in that way. Like, they just are allergic to coming to a conclusion on something and like fighting for it, and it's frustrating, like we as progressives, we like try so hard to like have that kind of I guess hard stance on something, and having people in government who don't like stand for as hard, I guess, as the same things you do, it's frustrating,
Yeah, and I think it leads to a lot of young people not voting. Like, I know that we have seen record turnout, but what was that in response to? That was in response to like the red wave, right? It was just that they didn't want another Republican presidency. It wasn't because they were excited about a Joe Biden presidency. It was like, well, it's better him than like Donald Trump, right? The left just doesn't put up viable candidates because they just play fence sitter. They don't have any strong positions on culture war issues, and that's what conservatives are mostly concerned with, right? Like gun rights, abortion, trans stuff, gay marriage. All of these things were really big talking points for conservatives, and the GOP platform is built on traditional values, which kind of a lot of progressive values fly in the face of, if we're being completely honest. But Democrats don't stake out a hard position on it. They take like the neutral, friendly, like, yeah, gay people are cool, but what are we going to do about it? Abortion, yeah, women's rights for sure, but we're not going to codify it. If they had a spine and they were like, these are things that we want to fight for, these are things that we value, and these are the things that we're going to do about the culture war issues, like nobody is willing to do that. I think that's why everybody was so excited when Jon Stewart and John Oliver actually, broke this shit down and they were talking about it. Jon Stewart specifically, right? Everybody was so hyped about that. Why can't Democratic politicians do that? There would be a massive blue wave if they took a position. I think a lot of people, are disheartened by that lack of commitment to like issues that are important culturally. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Definitely agree with that. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Did you have anything new to provide people with who are listening?
Nothing super exciting. I'm still in the middle of changing my schedule and all that other stuff. Was pretty stoked for midterms. I might do more politics and stuff like that come election season. I have avoided online politics like the plague, but I think it's kind of getting to that point with trans stuff being, like peaked in the culture war. I think that that's kind of something that I'll eventually dive into a little bit more seriously. But, community is important. Find people that you like, hang out with them, spend time with them, find people that share your values in your community and, go around that. But I mean, again, I understand kind of that priority with your individual well-being. I know a lot of people like shit on people that leave conservative areas. Like, why aren't you staying and trying to make it better? Like, it's okay to prioritize yourself. And I think that sometimes we get lost in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Always.
Yeah. I will probably have your Twitch in the description. So people can go there and watch you talk about politics and trans stuff. So
sounds good to me.